to this panel discussion today on discussing genocide. Scholars, survivors, and students speak. As Maura and Lisa said, my name is Dro Kanayan. I'm with the Merrimack Valley Armenian Genocide Education Committee, although I think we have that flipped around, but that's who we are. And we're a group of Armenians who have lives been touched by the Armenian Genocide. We have members whose parents are still alive, who survived it, families who was involved in the history of saving Armenians, those whose parents were orphaned and ended up actually being involved in American history, sending carpets, a carpet that an orphanage put together to the President of the United States for their help in terms of what they did to try to help the Armenians during that time. Our mission is to prevent future crimes against humanity. And it's a broad statement, but we see with the four people we have here how history keeps repeating itself. For those people who don't believe that, I mean, I'll be honest, when I grew up, teachers said that, I kind of looked at them like, okay, we'll look in the modern day. The economy will keep repeating itself. What happened to these people have repeated itself. And if you have any questions, Adolf Hitler said it specifically when asked about how you think you could get away with the Holocaust. And he said, after all, who remembers the Armenians? People who don't step up and take action and step forward will allow this history to repeat itself, and it should not happen to anybody involved. Any ethnic group should not go through this. Today we're here to discuss history. We're not here to debate it. What happened to each of these groups happened. There is no question. Our format will be an introduction of each panelist, and then questions and answers, both written that we have, as well as we would like questions and answers from the audience. I'm sure there are things you guys wonder. Don't be embarrassed, and we're going to ask each panelist to respond appropriately. We want to give everybody a chance to kind of hear differing views, differing thoughts. We're fortunate today to have four panelists who, while genocides, crimes against humanity happens for eons, this has happened to these people in the last 100 years. We have a scholar on the Armenian Genocide, who's a PhD at Clark Students in Genocidal Studies, as well as editors and a translator for one of the top Armenian newspapers in the country. We have a survivor of the Holocaust, of the Cambodian Genocide, and of Rwanda. These people's stories and experiences will touch you. And we hope you enjoy this as much as we enjoyed putting this together. Before I move forward, I'd like to thank Lisa and Maura for helping put this together. Lisa and I have become probably dear friends over the last year. And on behalf of our committee and all of us up here, thank you guys especially. Without further ado, I'm going to invite each person up in the farthest back in history to speak, to start to introduce each areas of expertise, and then we'll move forward to question and answer. So I'd like to begin with Mr. Hachik Mouradian.
Let me start off by saying that it's a privilege and honor for me to be here, to be part of this distinguished panel, and more broadly to be part of this event today. Speaking to you is very important to me. It is important because I was not many years ago in your place, and I was listening to survivors of genocide telling their stories. The reason we do not have an Armenian genocide survivor here, I am not a survivor obviously, is because we're talking about an event, we're talking about a genocide that took place 95 years ago. More than 95, almost 95 years ago. And obviously for somebody to have survived that and to be able to be here, up here telling their story, they would probably be more than 100 years old. And the sad part of the story is the fact that most of the survivors of the Armenian genocide had to live their lives after the genocide with the additional trauma and pain and suffering of the fact that the perpetrators, the Ottoman Turkish government and following that the Turkish government, never acknowledged the Armenian genocide. In fact, they denied it and they continue to do so. In the very few minutes that I have here, I would like to give you a very quick and broad introduction about the Armenian genocide. You probably know most of the things I'm going to say, but I'll just give that framework, and after that, I look forward to your questions. The Armenian genocide started in 1915 during the First World War, and it was a plan masterminded by the officials, by the leadership of the Ottoman Empire back then, mainly three top leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress, which was the name of the leadership at that point, who decided to get rid of the Armenian population in the Ottoman Empire, to cleanse the Ottoman Empire of its most predominant Christian element. And the way the genocide took place, the way the genocide was executed, was through two phases. Of course, initially, the entire intellectuals were killed. They were rounded up on April 24, 1915, which is Genocide Commemoration Day. On every year, on April 24th, Armenians commemorate the Armenian genocide. On April 24, 1915, all Armenian intellectuals, writers, priests were rounded up in Constantinople, in Istanbul, and then also in other areas, in other regions of the Ottoman Empire. Armenian soldiers serving in the Ottoman army were all rounded up and killed. And in this way, the entire head, the entire brain, and the entire force of the community, of the Armenian community in the Ottoman Empire was destroyed. And it was obviously very easy after that to go after the children, to go after the women, and to go after the elderly. And that's exactly what happened. All Armenians were ordered to be deported from their homes, from their ancestral homes, and to walk to the deserts of Syria in the south. There were countless massacres taking place during this process, both by organized Ottoman Turkish troops and paramilitaries, Kurdish gangs, etc. And by the time the Armenians got to the Syrian deserts, which was their destination, most of them had died. Only a few 100,000 had survived. We're talking about a population of around 2 million Armenians, even more, in the Ottoman Empire. But this was the first phase. The second phase, which was even worse, was to come. In 1916, in the summer of 1916, a second phase of direct, brutal massacres took place exactly in the Syrian deserts. That's where the Armenian refugees had arrived. We're talking about a couple of 100,000 Armenians, mostly women and children, as I said, and those who had actually managed to survive the arduous walks and marches from all over the Ottoman Empire. And in the second phase, these women and children and elderly, whoever had survived the entire process, were actually brutally massacred. Today, when we talk about survivors of the Armenian genocide, we talk about the very few people, in the few thousands at the very beginning, who actually managed to escape this carnage, who actually were able, in one way or the other, sometimes with the help of some other friends, Turkish friends, some American missionaries, etc., who actually managed to survive this carnage. And as I said, I grew up with a grandmother who was a survivor. I grew up surrounded by survivors. And increasingly, year after year, we have less and less survivors around us. And I believe it is my duty to tell their story in their absence. Just like it is the survivor's duty to tell the story of those who were killed and did not make it and did not survive. So I really look forward to sharing my story and my experiences with you. Thank you very much.
And our next speaker will be Janet Singer-Applefield, a survivor of the Holocaust.
Thank you very much for having me. I was 4 years old when the war began. I was born in Krakow, Poland, and I remember the first few years of my life because they were so wonderful and happy, and I lived with a very large extended family. I had a baby sister. I remember the Jewish holidays. My name was not Janet. My name was Gustava. And throughout my childhood, my name was changed 3 different times. Also, my appearance had everything to do with my survival because I was blonde and I looked like a typical Aryan child. So when the war began, I was 4 years old, and my father told me he heard bombs and shots and planes overhead because we lived very close to the border of Czechoslovakia where Germany attacked Poland. And so the first few days of the war were very confusing. My father sent me and my mother and my sister to my other grandparents' home, and we tried to escape. A lot of people tried to escape. There were about 200,000 Polish people who were heading in the direction of Russia. And my grandfather packed a few of our belongings onto a wagon, and we headed in the direction of Russia. I remember that trip because there were planes overhead shooting at us, and sometimes we had to hide in a ditch. And I remember seeing a plane shot and burned and crashed to the ground. Poland was defeated within 1 month's time, and when that happened, my father, who had joined the Polish army, joined us in Russia. He couldn't find us at first, and finally he did find us. But after a while, the Russians declared that all Polish nationals, they had to take out Russian papers. And so the family was divided. They didn't know what to do, where to go. My parents thought that the war would be over soon, and they could, if they took out the Russian citizenship, then they wouldn't be able to return to Poland and get their property back. So we went back to Poland. My grandparents stayed, and they were sent to Siberia to work in labor camps. When we first arrived in our village, all the Jews had to live in a ghetto. We tried to escape one more time, and we went to another village where my mother had some cousins, but it was pretty much the same situation in every town in Poland because the Nazis were very well organized. And but one more time we tried to escape. I forgot to mention, while we were in Russia, my little baby sister died from diphtheria. And so when we arrived at our cousins, my parents were desperately trying to give me away. But before that happened, we did try to escape. And one night we left in the middle of the night, and we headed in a horse and wagon. But pretty soon we were caught by the Polish police, and they were the Polish police collaborated with the Germans. So we were caught, we were beaten up, and we were turned back. Eventually, my parents were able to get in touch with a woman who was a nanny to one of my cousins, and they begged her, pleaded with her to take me. And this woman took me away. In the meantime, they had to report at a sports stadium where there was a selection going on. But before they did that, they decided not to walk in together. They separated from each other. And at the selection, some people went to the left, some people went to the right. My father was sent to the Krakow ghetto. My mother, we do not know what happened, but she did not survive. That day, several hundred people were marched to the local forest and shot. I went to live with this woman, and I had many close calls. There was a Gestapo who came to her apartment searching for Jews. He ransacked the apartment, looked under all the furniture. He came up to me, and he wanted to know who I was, and she told him a story that, I was her niece. I'm rushing because I don't want to tell the whole story, but I don't have much time. And anyway, he looked at me and he left. But my father knew that he had to make other arrangements for me. So he, when he was in the ghetto, he was able to obtain a birth certificate from a priest of a girl, Polish Catholic girl, who had died. And I took on this girl's identity. I became her. Her name was Kristina Antoszkiewicz. And one day my care was transferred from Maria's care to a cousin who was living on falsified Polish papers. And this cousin was very mean and brutal. She used to beat me. But anyway, she also, she had a boyfriend, and she and her boyfriend were in the Polish underground. And I used to have to take these big heavy boxes to the post office to mail them. Inside the boxes was ammunition, because he and she were in the Polish underground, and he was making ammunition behind his factory. One day we went to the city. She was going to meet him. Told me to wait for her in a church. She never returned. I was left on the street. I was 7 years old. I was abandoned. I was walking up and down the street, and a woman picked me up, took me into an apartment, and said I could stay there. And then I was sent to a farm where I lived with this Polish family. They didn't know I was Jewish. I always knew I had to keep a secret, and that's how I survived. I'll stop here, although there's more, but I'll stop here because I don't want to take any more time. Thank you very much.
Next is Sayon Soyon. Did I say it correctly, Soyon?
Yes.
Okay. A survivor of the Cambodian genocide and, in many ways, mental cleansing.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to say thanks to Joe, Lisa, and Moore for putting this great forum today. And also I want to thank my colleagues. I think this is the second time or the third time with Claudius and Janet that we speak together. I was born in the Ta province in Cambodia. I was taken away from my parents about the age of 7. Became a child soldier. At that training camp, I was trained to hate, to kill, to use weapon. I am fluent in using a weapon in 9mm AK-47 M16 at the age of about 10 or 11 years old. Part of my training at that camp is basically going to a labor camps or a prison center where I witnesses all these people being shackled rows and rows, and there's all bloods all over. Love is forbidden. I cannot show any emotion or sympathy for these people that I saw, or I will be executed. If you were caught falling in love or anything like that, a punishment can be execution in that era. And I want to go back a little bit. I think the revolution in terms of Khmer rule was started in the early 60s. And then Khmer Rouge become in power on April 17, 1975, where they took over the country and evacuated hundreds and thousands of people from capital Phnom Penh in Cambodia to a countryside, where they are being put to work on 12 or 13 hours a day. And I also trained being lectured by the government to hate. I do not have any families or relatives. All my families and other are my enemies. So therefore, I do not trust anyone. I am to report to the government that anybody say bad thing about the government. So in my training in that, I am immune to this vision and mission as to the practices they were practicing, because I was not aware of you guys were here. I mean, I don't even know that. I thought that Cambodian was the only human being that living on this planet, because I do not have any access to TVs or anything when I was a child. I do not have any formal education in my native language. So everything is in darkness, and you can say that I was brainwashed when I was young. And I also witnessed this as part of our training, that they will be having some prisoner and was accused of being a spy or an enemy of the government, that individual will be placing in the middle of a circle, and we have all the child soldiers would stand in a circle, and that they will be pointing one of us to do the execution. So that's a part of that I witnessed as well. It's definitely, it's not a good time, or basically it's a very, very sad time for me, but at the same time I do not have any thinking about to escape, and what they're doing was wrong, because I do not have any knowledge prior to my childhood's development that something is wrong, what they're doing is wrong. I thought it was a normal practice, that it is being practiced throughout the country. I am considered as part of the, which is, we call the Rumdocha, which is the, what we call part of my side was we call it Nira Day. And in part of the Nira Day aspect is, and basically we have the ultimate authority and power over other regional. Within that Khmer regional, there are 3 different levels. We call it Nira Day, which is where I'm from, and then they all call that Biyop, which is the second, and also Pacham. It basically, they divide this country into 3 regional. So Nira Day, Khmer Rouge in Nira Day would have the ultimate power and authority even to go to the other 2 regional to execute its own Khmer Rouge, if we believe that they are somehow seen as a threat to the whole concept and practice of the Khmer Rouge mission. So in 1979, Vietnam invaded Cambodia, and I were leading to fleeing to Thailand, and during that time I was put in charge into my platoon, put it in charge to lead tens and thousands of people away from the war. During that, I have been exchanging a couple battles with Vietnamese troops. I may have killed some of them, but I do not witness it personally that I have shot or killed any individuals. But during that battle, I may have killed more than 1 people. Finally, we became, we don't have any more ammunition, and we don't have any more staying, so that we sort of dissolve ourselves. By then, we're becoming almost like an ordinary citizen. So in that case, that I became alone in terms of everybody taking care of their own, that's probably around 1970, 1980s, and I became ill. My body was swollen because I don't have enough nutrition. You guys see the blockbuster, Ghostbuster, that Michelin tires that kind of popped up. That's how I look like. With but my the body water dripping out down of my body because I don't have enough food to eat and everything else. So in 1980 I arrived to Sakao 1, which is a refugee camps in Thailand. I stayed there and then transferred to Sakao 2. In 1983 I have come to the United States, living with my adopted parents in Middletown, Connecticut, and go to high school. But I'll answer that later on for any questions, so I'll just end there. Thank you.
our final introduction is somebody that I will say most of us can now say we've seen, because, you know, some of my colleagues who are of an elder generation than myself might have witnessed or had read about a lot of the prior genocides. Most of us, and when I look out in the audience, based on the age bracket, we've heard about Rwanda. We've lived through the stories that we've seen in the news and on the television. Well, now we have somebody who can even give it to us even more firsthand. Mr. Claude Cater.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Before I start off, as the introduction goes, I was around 12 years old when this genocide happened in my country of Rwanda. This year will be 16 years commemoration of it. So if you are 16 years old in the audience and above, you arrived when this happened. I'm very happy to be here sharing this story, because not many people can actually, after 16 years, many people cannot talk about it. And that goes for my younger siblings who cannot do that. And for me, it's very therapeutic to actually share the story, because I know I'm not only speaking for myself, I'm speaking for everybody else in my country, especially my family. When this genocide started, it's very vivid in my mind. It was on April 6, 1994. It was a Wednesday, which was supposed to be a school day. And the president of Rwanda at that time was assassinated. His airplane was shot down as he was coming to the airport. And obviously the country went under the state of emergency at that point. First thing I remember on radio in the morning, most of the news media in Rwanda is radio or newspaper. Not many people have televisions. It said the country is under a state of emergency, no schools are open, no businesses or of any sort, private or public. The market was shut down. And I was excited as a 12 years old, as you can understand. It's a day off for me in the middle of the week on Wednesday. Automatically, I start planning my day, how it's going to go. First thing, I will meet with my friends. We usually walk to school together, pick up a football, which you call soccer here, and head to the local football field and have a scrimmage all day. That was our pastime, playing football. My friends were thinking the same thing, because they knocked on my door right away. Let's go play football. This was almost like 8 o'clock in the morning when I was supposed to be going to school. As soon as we left my family compound with my friends, without even notifying my father, because my father knew it was day off too, he had no work, and he knew I have free time. 2 blocks from my house, as we were walking away going to the football field, there was already a roadblock. This was put up overnight. The roadblock consisted of people from my neighborhood that I knew, mainly young men from the age of 20 up to even 50. About 10 people were at the roadblock, 10 men, and they all had weapons of some sorts. None of them were in the military. So the ones who had guns had no idea where they got the guns from, but half of them had automatic weapons, such as pistols and AK-47s. And the other ones had primitive weapons used in Rwanda for farming, such as hoes for digging the ground and machetes to cut down bushes and banana plants and what have you. So I was very confused why there was a roadblock in my neighborhood. But as soon as I got to the roadblock, my answer would be given to me. There was a young man at the age, I would say between 20 to 25, early 20s, who was being interrogated at the roadblock by these men. They were asking him questions of where were you last night, seeming like he's being accused for having to do anything with the shooting of the president. And in my neighborhood, over 100 people were I was shocked personally how someone from my neighborhood had anything to do with the shooting of the president. In Rwanda, we had three ethnic division put there by colonialism during the early 1900s by Belgians and Germans. And one thing that was given was identity cards similar to the one I'm holding here. This is my father's identity card. And within it, it will say if you are either a Tutsi, a Hutu, or a Twa. Those were the three divisions. The Tutsis, in this case, were being accused for shooting down the president, and all the Tutsis in the country will have to pay for it. And within 100 days from that day in April until late July, 1 million people perished, including majority of my family, friends, and neighbors. I will not go into details of what I saw, but I could tell you it was something you would like to see. It was, I say it was a nightmare during the daytime, just on that first day of the genocide. What I saw, I felt I was, sleepwalking. It's not something that's realistic. I never seen people being killed in that manner. I'll stop there and look forward for your questions and clarification that we can do for you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We can open it up to questions from the audience, or if, I think we have a microphone in the middle of the room. Yeah. If it's easier, I will initiate the first question, and maybe we just go back and forth where I'll ask a question and somebody from the audience could come up and speak. If that works for everybody? Yes, no?
Sure.
The first question for the four speakers are, what was life like before the genocide? And why don't we start with Hachik and then go from there.
Okay. So in the case of the Armenian Genocide, prior to the Armenian Genocide, there was a very vibrant Armenian community in the Ottoman Empire. Armenians, as I mentioned earlier, were natives of that land. They had been living there for several thousands of years. Both in the cities and in the villages, there were many schools. An important number of Armenian youth that graduated from these schools went to Europe to get university-level education. They came back and in turn served in these schools as teachers. They also served in the community, in a broader community, as editors of newspapers, writers, etc. At this juncture, late 19th, early 20th century, Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire, Armenian culture, Armenian music was at its peak. It was living a kind of, a certain, Armenians call it, a certain renaissance, a revival of Armenian culture with all its different subdivisions. So it is at this period that, again, we're talking about the First World War and the years prior to the First World War, that hatred towards Armenians became gradually more manifest. Armenians were used to massacres here and there. There are many examples. In the 1890s, for example, throughout the Ottoman Empire, in several Armenian villages and towns, there were massacres of Armenians. In 1909, there was another huge, large-scale massacre. But they always thought that life would go on. These things happen. We just need to hang on and just move on afterwards. They did not realize that in 1915, the entire people was going to be uprooted and brutally massacred. So I gave a picture of Armenian life, intellectual life, cultural life, but also an important number of Armenians lived as peasants in villages. So it wasn't like Armenians were only concentrated in cities. And again, there was a vibrant community life there as well. This is pretty much what I can say in this brief time about cultural and life before the genocide.
Janet?
Anti-Semitism in Poland was always very, very severe. But the Jews thrived in Poland. Actually, they were invited by a king in, I think it was 13th century or 14th century, to come and live in Poland. On a personal level, my grandparents had a business that was doing very well. They were very well respected. People went to school. We lived in a little village outside of the city of Krakow. But, Jewish people were able to go to universities, study. I remember the holidays, practicing the holidays with the family. There would be times when my grandfather's store would be picketed, but, they just overlooked it and life went on. My early recollections are of the family and a very happy life there.
Sion?
In terms of Cambodia, I think we were once the great empire in the East Asia. It led to build one of the largest religious temple in the world, which called the Angkor Wat. And also before, in terms of my time, what I can remember was freedom before genocide. However, I think I was sort of grown up in my childhood during the 1973, where during the Vietnam War, where the Americans have bombed it in the country where closer to where I live, and that is part of my history, is sort of hiding from these bombs and wars that have been started. Cambodia always been known to have a lot of an endless civil war before the genocide, and I think its culture was sort of prosper and traditions and whatnot. Temples, people were doctors, educated, and in the schools for people to go, and life was sweet and great. But
for me, as a 12-year-old in Rwanda, I was oblivious to any political chaos that was going on, even previous to 1994. Growing up, my family was stable, in a sense of financially stable, and I had no problems getting what I wanted, and enjoying life in general. So all I've seen up to the point of the genocide was a happy life, going to the movies with my friends on weekends, and like I say, playing my favorite sport and enjoying life. But behind the scenes, politics was not working out well between the three groups, obviously. As I'm growing up now, and in retrospective, looking back, now I know what was going on between the division of the people. That's why the president of Rwanda was assassinated at that time. He was a Hutu president coming from a meeting in Tanzania where he was trying to make, sharing power with all the groups. About all that, I did not pay attention to, and my father tried to explain to me in the news what's going on. You're going one year out of the other, But overall, life was good. Some people were struggling. It's a third world country. Even today, poverty still exists. So not everybody was living a good life. HIV and AIDS was big there. But overall, for me, life was good. That's why I was saying when it happened, I was very happy to have a day off because I was going to enjoy myself along with my cousins, my friends. That answers your question.
Okay, who from the audience is going to dare to stand up? Please. There's a micro. Might be easier if you go around the front.
question is for Seon. My name is Megan Torres. My question is for Seon Sohn, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but
You're doing great. That's okay.
okay. I just want to know, what was it like, the transition from going from being a child soldier, where you witness everything that you witnessed, and then trying to become a normal high school student in America, like being around people who had no idea what you'd been through and who had no idea what life was like for you? What was that like?
Okay, thank you. Well, life wasn't normal here in the United States. It basically, everything is strange to me, even the buildings. When I came to the United States in late 83, I don't know a word of English. And I was thrown into 9th grade, and that's in high school. I started to learn ABC in high school when I was 9th grade, and then I graduated in 1986. With having said that, I was having a lot of problem, basically in terms of, normally you all practice this conflict resolution nowadays. Before, I was just using physical. To win is basically is getting physical. So one perfect example, that's a lot of people come in here, playing, we're playing floor hockey, that little orange ball that you do play. I was a 90-pound skinny little Cambodian kid that just arrived recently. There's about 6'2", 240-pound guy who would check me and flew me to the bleachers, and it was painful. So I say, hey, I'm not gonna take this crap. So I was like, I whack him with the hockey stick, and that's basically it. So I don't encourage you to do that, but so life wasn't difficult. And another perfect example was that when I go in, people stick a middle finger at me, and I was like, yeah, all happy, I found a friend, and all that kind of stuff. But later on, when I find out, I was so mad, and of course, I wasn't really terrible or troubled child, but it was a difficult life, especially in terms of communication and understanding the new cultures and everything else. And how I get to where I am now, I think I was surrounded by, I thank to my adopted parents, who is Caucasian. I was adopted by a Caucasian family living in Middletown who care so much about me, and I think they were behind me all the time. And also coming professionally, working with a lot of people in higher level, I was involved with a lot of people through my story and my work currently. I think I work with the governor office, I work with Commissioner Ed Davis, I work with Janet Reno when she was a U.S. attorney on creating new policy for better to provide for immigrants and youth and others that make sure we educate our law enforcement to recognize different cultures so that they know misunderstanding between those, and for example like the use of force, and I used to work with the local police department training all officers all over the country to be mindful. For example, our culture, we usually put our money in the socks, and if you're being stopped by an officer, bend over to reach out for that it's a red flag. So all those things that I get involved in, that it basically helped me a lot, and I'm still not normal person. I guess I do seek counselor here and there. So thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Hello. My question is for Ms. Applefield. What was it like always changing your name to escape the Nazis? What was your general reaction always changing your name?
Could you repeat that?
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear the question.
What was your general reaction to changing your name to survive?
What was your reaction to changing your name to survive?
What was the what?
What was your reaction to changing your name to survive?
Oh, changing my name. Well, it was so deeply impressed upon me that I had to do everything that I was told. It was a matter of life or death. So whatever I was told to do, I did. But it was a little confusing because, my name was Gustava, then it was changed to Kristina Antoszkiewicz. That was my Polish name. And then when I came to this country, I came to New Jersey, and my uncle took me to school to register me for school. By the way, I had never been to school before. I didn't speak English. I didn't know how to read or write in English. And my uncle said, well, what name would you like? And right on the spot, I had to tell him a name. And I picked the name Janet. Actually, I said Jeanette because we had a French cousin who lived in Paris, and she used to visit us before the war. And she was very beautiful and glamorous, and she had, I remember, long red nails, and that really impressed me. And I said Jeanette, and my uncle said, no, it's Janet. So that's how it became Janet. And, I just accepted whatever happened. Whatever I was told to do, it was okay. It was a survival mechanism that served me very well and saved my life. It didn't serve me well as an adult because I didn't question anything. Even I became an adult.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, those of you who experienced the genocide firsthand, it's kind of similar to Megan's question, but what was the adjustment like to afterwards?
This is a question I think I'd like all 4 speakers to address because there's been everybody's had some different experiences throughout their whole history on how the adjustment's been different for each generation. So,
well, my adjustment was a little difficult because when I came here with my father, we came on a 90-day visitor's visa. And in 90 days, we would have had to leave. And the only thing that would allow my father to stay is if he got married to an American citizen. So the family looked around and they found him a wife. So in 3 months' time, I had a new mother and a new country and a new name and new language, and everything was new. So it was difficult, but as I said, I was able to adjust rather quickly. Thank you.
In the case of the Armenian Genocide, most of the survivors, again, after the massacres in Deir Zor, in the Syrian deserts, etc., those who survived, the thousands of Armenians who survived, were scattered around the world. And the same challenges that we talked about during the Holocaust was there during the Armenian Genocide in terms of adjusting to entirely new environments. Most of these Armenians stayed in the region, in Syria, in Lebanon eventually, where the language was completely different. They had to learn Arabic. Some of them went to Europe, to France. Others came to the United States. Actually, here in the US, you had a large number of genocide survivors coming here and settling here and becoming part of life here. And I'd like to highlight one point here. There's this issue of continuity that we always sometimes forget about. Because the experience of these survivors and our experiences as students, as people living in this country, are so more intertwined than we'd like to think of. It's one way to look at this panel and this discussion is to say that, you know what, why are we talking about issues that happened across the Atlantic, somewhere else in the world, and in one case a century ago, in another half a century ago, and a couple of decades ago? Why is it relevant for us? Why is this morning, early morning, important for you, and why is it important for us to show up at this early time? And the issue is the continuity. And the issue is the common humanity that binds us all. And in all responses that you're going to see, in all responses that you're going to hear from the Holocaust survivors, Armenian genocide survivors, Cambodian genocide, Rwandan genocide, some of the answers, most of the answers are similar, mainly because of the common humanity, and mainly because of the common inhumanity of man to man. And that is, I think, an important message that we have to take home. Thank you.
I'd just like to add something similar to what you're saying. When we first came to this country, we could not talk about what happened to us. This was unspeakable. What we suffered was unspeakable, and people really didn't want to hear it. So for years and years, we did not speak about what happened. And in terms of my own story, I kind of minimized and devalued what happened to me because I was a child. I was never in any concentration camps. So I kept saying to myself, well, I didn't have it so bad. You know, I wasn't in concentration camps. So it was not until many, many years later that we started to talk about it and people started to be interested and want to know. And I guess it takes a long time for the rawness and the pain to subside a little bit before we can talk about it.
For the Cambodian genocide, I think we still do have a huge problem. I don't think we are well adjusted to this new world yet. And I'm talking about in mental health issue. A lot of people have post-traumatic stress, and basically that lead to their sons and then their grandchilds. And basically there's no such coping strategy that has been assisted to the Cambodian genocide survivor. And basically in Laos, I think the second is in the country, I think close to 30,000 Cambodians who have gone through this genocide and had a great deal of difficulty from adapting to the new cultures, to child raising, and it's very, very difficult. For me, I think it's maybe because of, it still is a challenge for me because I feel a sense of, I was lonely. I was sad all the time. After that, as I grown, I seen, you know, children's having parents and being talked to or have siblings to play with. I completely feel lonely and sad, and I was, you know, what would have been different in my life if I were to have my entire family, wherever that may be, I was still in Cambodia or not. I just still wonder, and still wonder today, because I have no family or relative here except me. I don't know if they survived. I'm not sure if they're dead, because I have no recollection. So I do have very, very, you know, professionally, I am adjusting really well. Personally and mentally, I still have some difficulty.
For me, in Rwanda, after the genocide took place, Rwandans in general, the survivors and the people who stopped the genocide, had to work together, you know, to make sure violence don't continue. Because this was a ruralist land. The international community completely ignored Rwanda. The United Nations itself, as you have studied or seen in some documentaries, withdrew. They were actually in the country and they just took off. And so is other people from other countries who are not Rwandans. So Rwandans had to work together to save ourselves. At 12 years old, I had to learn how to change IVs in hospitals, so I can help kids who are near death. You know, I had to work in an orphanage home, taking care of kids my age, adopted kids when I was a kid, basically. And that was throughout the whole country. Everybody was working together. The hardest part was burying the dead, because people were killed in the streets, as I mentioned, on roadblocks. So people were just left on the streets, and we had to do mass burials before you can actually move in your home, because some homes you have bodies in your backyard. This went on for over 6 months, just burials. We had to kill dogs that were arrived during the genocide because they were addicted to human flesh. They would try to eat you when you arrive. So that was another thing that was that had to be done. Fortunately for me, I had an aunt who was in the United States of America when the genocide happened. And after the genocide, she decided to adopt myself and my siblings so we can escape this horror. Schools were not open, obviously, because everything was rooted and there was no infrastructure. So she wanted us to come here to America and go to school, you know, continue our education. But we are not normal, as Sion says, or Janet, because when you survive a genocide such, or any horror such as this, you are left to think humanity is no, humanity doesn't care for you, basically. You don't trust nobody. So coming to the United States actually did me some harm more than if I stayed in Rwanda, where I was with people who survived the genocide. So psychologically, when I got here, I enclosed myself to myself, kept a lot of friends, even family away, because little things will tick me off, little things such as surprise visits, because people who surprised you in Rwanda usually were there to kill you. To this day, I still have those issues. I never sought professional help, and thank God I never really got into mental breakdown, but my siblings who are younger than me go through this every day. And I attribute that to working with Facing History and Ourselves, which I get to go to different schools and share this story, As I said, it's therapeutic. This is the only therapy I get. If believe it or not, you're my therapist in a way. So that's how I move on in life.
Thank you.
We have a question that was asked earlier that I'd like to address to the panel, if you don't mind. There's a question on how are your communities dealing with the, I use the phrase, genocidal denialists of today. Those that are saying things happened, didn't happen, and we'd like to kind of hear what each of you think about that.
Well, it is said that denial is the last phase of genocide. Because after killing the human beings, killing an entire population, killing an entire people, the next step is killing the memory. And killing the memory functions on different levels. When states deny a genocide, they're effectively saying, not only did we kill you, but also we got away with it, and nobody cares about it. But also on the personal level, for a survivor, if you tell a survivor, it's one thing for a survivor to go through all these experiences we've been talking about and survive, and all these memories, having to live his or her entire life with these memories. And it's something else altogether for somebody to come and say, you know what? Every single thing you experienced is a lie. You did not really experience these things. So denial in all its levels, denial of genocides from the Armenian Genocide to the Holocaust and the more recent cases of genocide is an insult not only to the individual, but to humanity itself. Because it is an insult, because genocide is a crime against humanity, and denying it is, again, as I said, is an affront, is an insult to humanity. In the case of the Armenian Genocide, for example, as I said, despite the fact that most of the Holocaust and genocide scholars in the world recognize the fact, have studied it thoroughly, etc., the Turkish government continues to deny the fact of the Armenian Genocide and actively lobbies against it across the world, spends millions of dollars every single year, even in this country, to deny the Armenian Genocide and to stop the United States Congress from passing legislation, from passing resolutions recognizing the Armenian Genocide. And again, all this is every single day, day in, day out, an insult to survivors, to those few survivors, to the ever-diminishing number of survivors who are waiting for some kind of closure to what happened to them.
I had an experience, someone that I met, a stranger, but he started to talk to me, and he started to pass out pamphlets and newsletters, and I didn't know what it was, and I said, okay, I'd like to read what it is. And there were these horrible lies about Jews, but not really specifically mentioning Jews, but it was sort of in a roundabout way, but you knew they were talking about Jews. And so I started to speak to this man, and but there was no way of convincing him, and he kept bringing more literature and more things for me to read. And It was extremely upsetting. I just didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know I had never met someone like that. And as we were talking, there was another person that stood and listened to us. And all of a sudden, this person piped in, and she said, "Oh yes, I had this man who was he came to fix my lock, and he took advantage of me, and he was a Jew." and it was like, okay, everything that he was saying, she confirmed. And then all of a sudden, the man saw that he had another possibility of converting somebody, so he sort of dropped me and started to talk to this young woman. But it's extremely upsetting and frustrating, and frankly, I don't know how to deal with it.
Sure, could you repeat that question? I sort of lost my train of thought, but that would be great.
That's okay. I do that all
so
the
many, but
That's okay. I do that all the time. As a community, how is your community dealing with genocide deniers of today?
For the Cameroon community itself, it's go along the line to what our scholars said in terms of denial. Even the Cambodian Prime Minister right now was a former commander of Khmer Rouge. So although the international trying to have a tribunal to sort of trial the top Khmer Rouge leaders, it still, it's only a little phase of moving forward in terms of the genocide. As the community itself here in Lo, I think they are the parents are not in the denial, but I think the young kids, the younger generation are in denial because they do not believe that is happening to their parents or grandparents, that the genocide did not happen. Because they are either born here or they were very young during the genocide. Even in Cambodia nowadays, some sibling or some kids saying that their parents are liar. I mean, they said, "I never seen this. Why are you lying to me about these things?" Only recently that Cambodia was adopted to teach a high school level of Cambodian genocide. So the whole thing of denial is definitely, it's not just the community, but I think the international community as well. In fact, United States still have the embassy seat for the Khmer Rouge up until 1993 here in Washington, D.C. because, they know this happening, but they still recognize, to have a seat for this seat. So I guess that's my thought.
In Rwandan community, I will not speak for communities outside Rwanda because I've never been to all of them, but I've been to Rwanda twice after the genocide to see how people are living together. And I still have family members. I have a younger sister and cousins who are still living there. So they email me, and tell me what's going on. But having been there personally, because, what you hear, it's not usually reality on the ground. The only deniers of this, who can deny anything of the genocide of Rwanda, you have to do that outside the country. In Rwanda, everybody will physically demand you that. So, and through courts, we have a traditional court system where they'll take you to court, and if you deny genocide, to us, we feel you want to continue it. That's within Rwanda. Now, outside the country of Rwanda, people have, freedom of speech and what have you, and they talk the denial rhetoric, But in Rwanda, majority of run to forgive, but not forget. And for me, as a survivor and talking on behalf of my family, if someone outside Rwanda denies the genocide or any of my family members being killed, I will lose it, I'll turn into something else. And I'm a peaceful person. I try to keep my cool and control my emotions, but that's one of things I do not tolerate, any denial of any genocide, because you have survivors, people went through this. So there's ignorance which is tolerable, and there's ignorance which is not acceptable, such as denying any genocide of any sort.
My question is for everyone. After surviving these experiences that you've gone through, how have your views on life changed at all?
Well, again, not talking out of experience, obviously. A good place to go for these kinds of stories are the Memoirs of Survivors, and actually the stories that the survivors themselves tell. And one aspect that was mentioned in the context of the Holocaust was silence. Dealing with these memories, moving on, experiencing life, one way of doing it would be to just, sort of completely forget, completely repress those memories and try to rebuild a new life. And in many cases, particularly in the case of the Armenian Genocide and the Holocaust, the survivors in the immediate aftermath, what they were thinking about was to actually just rebuild their communities, survive. Because that was the best way for revenge for them at that point. The best way for revenge was to survive. The best way for revenge when in genocide is to show the perpetrator that you did not manage to kill every single one of us. So that is the first phase of sort of repressing the memories. You hear all these stories about grandmothers, Armenian grandmothers, who, in their silence sometimes, they wouldn't tell anything to their grandchildren, to their children about what happened to them, and then in their silence they would cry. Or they would only start speaking years later. Or something would happen in their lives, in their everyday lives, and it would trigger all these experiences, all these memories. And that's one way of coping. Of course, then, at some point, there is also many others have the need to speak. Many others have to need to speak because that too is a kind of revenge. It is a way of standing up and saying, you know what? You wanted to silence us, but we're not going to be silent. We're going to keep talking about this. And this panel is actually a very good example of that. Coping with genocide, coping with the aftermath of genocide, it could be different for different people. But the essence, but the core is the same. It's just an expression of the rejection of the perpetrator and the genocide, an expression of the fact that, you know what, we're going to continue, we're going to move on. And no matter how they do that, that's the statement they're making.
After the Holocaust, many survivors went into the helping professions. They became psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. It's amazing how many did that. Also, right after the Holocaust, people needed to pick up their, like you said, pick up their lives very quickly and do something and be successful in life. And I think it's amazing how well survivors did. They were really very, very good at just going on with their lives. I do extensively speak about this subject. It's my passion or my mission, I don't know what to call it, but I think it's important for me, and I think it's important for others to hear what really happened. And also, for me, it was important to educate myself, to learn as much about the perpetrators. What was it that made these people do what they did? What would I have done if I was a German living in that time? How would I have acted? What would I have, would I have become a Nazi? Would I have hidden Jews? What would I have done? Those are really big questions that I don't think anyone can really answer for sure, because we don't know what would be like. If our life was in danger, what would we do? I think that it's important to speak about the subject, to understand it, to also for students. I think it's really important for you to ask questions of your parents, of your grandparents, learn their stories, because we all have stories. And I think learning those stories, we become stronger, and we can overcome any difficulties if we understand things better. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to give a very short view of my view, because I think there's a line, and maybe we're ending at 10 o'clock, right? So for most of the Cambodian genocide, living day by day, meaning that they are work to just live a day at a time. They want to close their eyes and live on and forget the past. For some like me, younger like myself, became, like Janet said, became a social worker or a teacher, and professionally in counseling, most of them. So they definitely do, be happy. There's no long-term vision for life, either for their children or their grandchildren. They just only think about themselves right now.
For me, the way I move on is I watch a lot of comedy. I'm blessed to have a cousin who thinks he's a comedian, always telling jokes and laughing, and attend a lot of social events of Rwandans and other cultures, and try to be out and about, That keeps me not having to have no nightmares about what I went through. And for the rest of my family, I would say they're younger than me, so many of them don't even want to hear about the genocide. If we're watching a movie that involves any killing using knives, we all flinch, we all lose, you can tell in our face, we get flashbacks. So we try not to watch no violent movies. And in my studies in university and my work today, it's similar to my other colleagues, is to find a way to help other people understand about these social injustice and help not happen again, although it keeps happening everywhere, like in Darfur, Sudan. But as long as people are aware of, they are not ignorant about it, I feel some awareness helps a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a question for the survivors. What steps did you have to take to find out what happened to your families after the genocides?
Repeating,
What
please?
steps?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What steps did you have
Okay.
to take after the genocides to find out what happened to your families?
Well, my father survived. My mother did not. The Red Cross was the agency that did research, and I still, to this day, do not know exactly how she died. But not too long ago, several years ago, the German government released a lot of new records, so I'm still in the process of researching.
For me, recently, in my first time after 30 years, I went back to Cambodia in November I spent it for a month. Went to my hometown and have not found anybody yet, but potentially maybe I had some information about where they're about. Going back this May, hopefully, if I'm not too busy with work or if my boss allowed me to go, to explore a little bit more. And I have started 10 years ago, but because of my blurry memory, it took me a long time, but hopefully in May that I will find somebody.
For me and other Rwandans, what we did, I mentioned earlier, is judge the killers ourselves, because we've put them to international tribunals. That takes years and waste times, especially for people who are looking to know what happened to their families, such as my family. So the traditional courts in my country called gacaca actually help, because part of letting go of the perpetrators is saying where these bodies are. You know, where did you put them? It could be a mass burial, it doesn't matter. But as long as at least you know where your loved one is and go put some flowers there, it puts peace to my mind or anybody's mind. And that's what happened regarding one of my uncle who was killed as he was going to work. We had no idea where he was buried or where he was killed until someone who was involved in the killing shared the information. So that's how people in Rwanda are finding out about their loved ones. And many, we have no idea where they are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Kachik Muradian. You said that your grandmother was a survivor of the Armenian Genocide. What was it like growing up with a loved one that had survived such a horrible thing, living in a society that wasn't really aware of the genocide?
Well, my memories of my grandmother and her generation are mixed. There were people in my family, among the elderly, who actually declined talking about what happened. They really didn't want to go there. So you only saw snippets and flashbacks every now and then. I remember very vividly, for example, once there was this show on the television when one Turkish official on one of the Arab television networks got up and started talking and denying the Armenian genocide, saying that you know what, nothing happened, the Armenians revolted, etc., and this was war, civil war, etc. And then that was one of the moments when I could really see on her entire face, and it's like the level of the horror that she was experiencing, for someone to tell her on TV to deny what had actually happened to her. So growing up and again in the Armenian communities, especially the communities that are closer knit, and in many places they are, you interact with these people every single day. You are part. The past is part of the present, especially when there is denial. It's like you're living in two times. One is the current time, and the second is the time of these people who haven't gotten over it, and they pass their heritage on. They pass their experiences on. And you don't have much choice here. You can either say, you know what, I'm not going to hear about it. Whatever happened, happened. But chances are you're going to say, these people are suffering. These people are still living in the past. And I should do something. I should affirm their suffering. I should demand acknowledgement for their own sake and also for mine and for this continuity. So that's how I'd frame it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This question is for Seon. When you were a child soldier, you had told us that you could not show any emotions. When you witnessed or you even killed someone, how did you feel? Did you feel remorse, or did you feel saddened, or did you hate, and how did you cope with it?
You mean my feeling now if I've seen people killing?
Or
then?
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough question. I do have some sense of feeling that there was something that I should do. I think the way they it's very difficult then. I really don't know how to respond to that, but all I know that I do miss my parents and my sibling. And at the time, I didn't know, like I said earlier, that I think you sort of immune to what you were preach and practice. So it really, it's tough for me. And back then, and I assume that I probably have something, but I didn't show it because in order to survive, I just have to learn and show. So but maybe at the time I was about maybe 9 years old. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Can
I believe Janet has a follow-up to that.
Can I just add something to the question that was asked about what is the research that I've done? I totally forgot to mention that I've been back to Poland 3 times, and I met with the family that saved me, and I went back to my town, and I met people who remembered specific details of what happened to the family, and one woman told me that she remembered a whole bunch of my family, my grandmother and my aunts and uncles, being marched to the local cemetery. They were made to dig their own graves, and they shot into the grave. My uncle tried to escape, and he was shot. So I did find out some things about the family. One of my uncles hid in a baker's oven, and someone denounced him, and he was shot and killed. My grandfather was recognized walking on the street in Krakow. Someone reported him, and he was arrested and killed. And that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
And one final question to all the panelists in the spirit of what this forum is and what we hope as part of our committee to do. We're curious your thoughts about genocide education in our school systems as a whole, and what can be done to improve it and sway the world's opinions toward recognizing everything you all went through.
This is obviously a very important. We cannot just, it's very clear that genocide education is important. But I would like to go a little beyond that. We sometimes fail to recognize the fact that when we're talking to high school students like you, we are talking to the future of this country. We are talking to the future of humanity. And when we talk to congressmen, or when we see congressmen, presidents, journalists, activists, etc., we forget that these people, every single one of them, were where you are right now. So in fact, when we're educating, when we're talking about genocide in high schools, we are essentially talking to our future presidents. We are talking to our future journalists. We are talking to our future intellectuals. Essentially, what we are doing is we are paving the way for a better world, for a better humanity, for a group of people who will, when given the choice, opt out of being a perpetrator. When given the choice, opt for supporting the recognition of genocides, opt for doing something. And I think the ultimate question, the ultimate challenge is to do something. Because we can all leave this room here very happy that we participated in this panel, in this forum, and do nothing about it until the next time we come and sit here. But the ultimate message and the ultimate challenge of genocide education is not only to educate, but also to pass on that drive to fight, to struggle for these things. Because all of us have lives, all of us have things to do, all of us have, would like to have fun doing many things in our lives. But I'm sure all of us can make a few minutes, a few hours, every single week or every month or every year to do something to contribute in the fight against genocide. And believe me, every single one of you have agency, every single one of you have the power to change things. And if you just forget about that, if you don't believe that, just think about the fact that every single grown-up you see, on TV, on shows, everywhere. They were all on your seats. They went through the same exact experience as you did. So if you look at them making an impact, believe me, you're just looking at you making an impact in the future. And the sooner you start, and the surer you are of this, the better for you and it's better for humanity.
Prejudice and discrimination does not start with governments. It didn't start with Hitler. The seeds of hatred and discrimination started way, way, way before. So I think the reason I speak, I want everybody to know what happened, but I also hope that every one of us will become in touch and aware of our own prejudices against people who are different than we are. And that if we come across any type of discrimination, whether it's teasing, it's bullying, it's any kind of a racial slur, we don't just let it go by, because we, like you said, we have power. You'd be surprised. Each one of us has power to make a change and to do something. And it starts with every one of us. Thank you.
For me, I just want to echo our expert and scholars, Kachin. I think basically the four of us is here this morning to speak in two futures, presidents, congressmen, senate, journalists, and educators. And basically, I hope that you will, in the future, wherever you be, you will think about this morning forum about what to do with the genocide to help prevent it from happening in the futures. And I also think that in terms of the genocide, I think we should redefine the definition of genocide. I'm not an expert in there, but I think the definition at the UN now is basically only include in a massive, after the facts, a massive killing of one culture or one ethnic, and that if you redefine that aftermath, it's what are you going to do after 1 million people already die and then you try to persecute one person? I think there are something that at the international level need to relook at this definition. In terms of the law area, I think we are working with Dr., which is a Cambodian person who is a doctor education, and basically she developed a teaching tool for be teaching in low high school, I think next year, regarding to the Cambodian genocide. So if all educator here is interested, I think I can give you contacts to that individual if you're interested in incorporate the genocide in your academic curriculum. So thank you.
For me, I say the reason I do this, having to deal with the emotions of it, is in hopes of raising awareness and eradicating ignorance. That's how I put it, because ignorance is dangerous, and most of the people who commit these crimes of humanity are brainwashed, and from our talks you can understand how that went about. And we, four of us, coming from different continents, different geographic locations, most likely different religions, culture, language, obviously, as an African and Asian, Europe. It's scary because we're sharing almost similar story. I studied the Holocaust, I studied the Armenian Genocide and Cambodian Genocide, and what happened to the Native Americans on this continent, which is not talked about, right? And it's very similar, and that's the scary part. And us being in this room today, in this auditorium, what I want you to understand is it has nothing to do with numbers, as science says. If one person dies, it piles up, and it gets to 1 million, and 6 millions, and on and on. So it starts with a homicide, and then it goes to what is considered a genocide, which is just a definition. So it starts from your town, and it gets worse. A perfect example I can give you is Rwanda is not a big country. Second smallest in Africa, within the continental Africa, without counting the islands, such as Cape Verde and all these small islands. Now, Rwanda is compared to the size of Vermont, state of Vermont. So imagine in Barrington, Vermont, if a genocide starts and starts spread out, it will reach Massachusetts because we're within the United States, you know? So it's to give you the reality that it starts on a small grassroots level, and you, the students especially, to say what everybody said, you are the future of not only this country, but this world in general. You can make a difference on every corner of this planet in your adult lives, and especially in social injustice and stopping the killing of innocent lives. Because at the end of the day, we share same air. You know, if this planet goes down, nobody's gonna stay behind. I don't care if you can afford to go to the space station, you know. So we're all together in this. Thank you.
As the bell is about to go off in about a minute, I wanted to first say thank you to all our speakers today. I think everybody found this very informative and enlightening. And I'd also like to thank the students for your thoughtful and insightful questions. I think we were all very impressed. Finally, I'd like to thank Lisa and Maura and ask them to come out here for a second. I'm going to embarrass them a bit. They have been tremendous partners in promoting genocide in education and awareness. And on behalf of the Armenian Genocide Education Committee of Merrimack Valley, we'd like to present them with this book for their resources, the United States official documents on the Armenian Genocide.